What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is not a Wednesday. It is a Saturday. Tyler and I decided to hop on the mic and talk a little conference realignment as what a chaotic last 48 hours it was. Just absolute madness. So we thought we would get on and just talk about it because we feel like 5 days from now, number one, the news will be kind of over with. And then number two, like we already have so much other stuff to talk about when it comes to Iowa football that it's hard to squeeze this big news in there. So what is going on, Tyler? How's your weekend? Hopefully it's good. How you been?
Yeah, long time no see since
2 days ago,
two
literally.
days ago when we recorded this pod. And, it's funny, we mentioned on the pod how we were kind of like, we'll just save the conference realignment for next week. I'm sure more news will come out. And boy, were we right on that. It's kind of exploded here the last couple of days for not only the Big Ten, obviously, for the Big 12. So a lot to talk about. Like you said, obviously, too much to squeeze into an already loaded, podcast episode with everything else that we're trying to get covered. So kind of cool that we're doing this as its own sort of podcast episode.
Yep. So let's get right into it. Let's dive deep in this. I think all this really started not last year when USC UCLA joined the Big Ten, but I believe it started a couple years ago when Texas Oklahoma jumped to the SEC. I think that's when all this stuff started kind of like happening. And I think the Big Ten sat there and was like, we need to act too. We need to bring in some additional teams to make even more money in the media rights and all that. And what did they do? They went out and got arguably the two biggest programs in the Pac-12 and by far the biggest market in the Pac-12, LA. And the Big Ten looked at themselves and said, we're now going to be a coast-to-coast team from LA to Chicago to New York, Washington, D.C. I mean, we hold pretty much the biggest markets. And so we went out and we got UCLA, USC, and you knew at that point that the Pac-12 was probably dead because you knew the Big Ten wasn't going to be done with those two schools. You knew that they were going to get some more schools. I know we talked about it last year. Like, what will the schools be? Will it be Oregon, Washington? Will it be Stanford, Oregon? We didn't really know at the time, but we knew that there was going to be some more teams involved, and here we are. But it really kind of escalated when Colorado made the jump to the Big 12 last week. I think that's when it really started for like the Big 10 being like, all right, we better act fast because Oregon, Washington might make the jump to the Big 12 if we don't. So we got to act fast on this. And like you said, it all just came down to these last 48 hours. And just like this, Oregon, Washington in the Big 10 and Colorado, Arizona, and Arizona State and Utah to the Big 12.
Yeah, I think you made an excellent point there. I think we kind of forget what all started this, and I think you're right. I think Texas and Oklahoma leading for the SEC was kind of the first domino to fall, obviously, and that's due to back when. Okay, so my thoughts on this situation is, and we kind of talked about it a little bit off air. What's happening to the Pac-12 right now? I thought originally was going to happen to the Big 12 after Texas and Oklahoma left.
Yep.
I thought, oh God, you're losing your two biggest brands, your two biggest teams, the most probably revenue coming from those two schools just because of who they are. What are you going to do? I thought they were going to potentially be kind of on the ropes and falling in line to a similar situation as the Pac-12. But credit to them, obviously they've pivoted really well, getting, first of all, a new commissioner of the Big 12 who got that TV deal done. Because I think it was like how I read about it and looked at the situation. It was kind of a fight between the Big 12 and Pac-12 who's going to get this next deal, and the Big 12 beat the Pac-12 to it and kind of stabilized their conference. And then shortly after, they were adding, what was it, UCF, Houston,
BYU and
BYU,
Cincinnati.
and Cincinnati. So they pivoted early and kind of stabilized their conference. And now obviously they saw that the Pac-12 was falling further and further apart due to, like you mentioned, USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten. And they kind of offered, a lifeboat, a life preserver to those schools and helped them out and said, yeah, we'll gladly take you. And like you said, now Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado are going there as well. So I think they did a really good job of, like I said, pivoting. And obviously the Big Ten, getting Oregon and Washington, which I didn't realize are two of the top 25 TV markets that are out there, to join already. USC, UCLA, and all the other big brands of the Big Ten is huge.
Yeah, for sure. And let's start with just because with Iowa circumstance, we'll end with the Big Ten, but let's start with just the Big 12 real quick. I find it funny, Colorado, you go back like just almost a decade ago, or a little bit more than a decade ago, Colorado left the Big 12 because at the time thought the Big 12 might have been, to its end days. And so they moved to the Pac-12, a kind of a more, at the time, a more reliable conference. And then it's amazing that just a short 10, 12 years later, they're going back to the Big 12 because they see the writings on the wall of the Pac-12. So I thought that was kind of funny how they were kind of the first team. But you're exactly right. The Big 12 did an amazing job here. I know we get some Iowa State listeners. So if I was like an Iowa State fan, or I know how Iowa State fans feel, like just 2 years ago, I'm sure like you were pretty worried that what's going to happen to us? I mean, if the Big 12 really goes down, where are we going to go? Because we're not getting invited to the Big 10, and where do we fit in?
Yeah.
And so to go from that to like, okay, like the Big 12, now it's never going to be as powerful as the Big 10 or the SEC, but that's okay. Like you can be the third conference and still have a really good conference and still make decent money. And I think that conference can be a fun conference to watch, both in football and basketball. So yeah. I think, they did a hell of a job. And like I said, if I was an Iowa State fan, I'd be pretty excited about it. I think the newest members, you couldn't ask for some better teams, Arizona State, Utah and Colorado. It's not bad. And Utah, especially in football, but then in basketball, Arizona. So, like that, I was seeing like tweets of like when Arizona, Kansas play every year, like in basketball, like that's going to be amazing. Right. So Houston, the big,
by the way,
Houston, really good. Oh, that's going to be the best, always seems best like conference. They're a top.
Yeah, no doubt.
So they did a good job. I think right now for the Big 12 at 16 teams, I think at some point they will add more, but I think for right now, they're going to stay at 16. And I think for the Big 10 now, as we switch to the Big 10, I think as of right now, we will stay at 18, but before long, I would say within the next year or two, we will probably get up to 20, if not up to 24. I think we will eventually get Cal and Stanford. That's what I firmly believe. I think the Big 10 prides itself on kind of academics, and I think those are the two next schools that for academically would make sense. And then at that point, I think we'll start reaching out to the ACC, and I could see us getting 3 or 4 ACC members, or maybe getting 3, and then hopefully at some point getting Notre Dame. But I don't think it stops at 18. For now, it does, but I don't think it's going to be too long before we see 2 more members and then maybe an additional 4.
Yeah, it's hard to predict that. And like you said, who's to say that we're not adding more teams? I mean, it all happens so fast and rapidly. And it obviously depends on, what happens to, like you said, the ACC, for example. It's weird because I keep hearing stuff about the ACC complaining about their TV deal and their conference. Like Florida State keeps talking about wanting to leave, and they keep saying like Florida State better watch out because they're in a TV deal to like 2030. Yeah, like they could get in like legal trouble by like talking about wanting to leave and stuff like that because they're under contract. So it's a whole situation that I clearly haven't looked into enough and don't quite understand. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. And they were talking too. They're like, what happens to the remaining Pac-12 teams? Obviously right now you've got Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, Washington State. And I was watching a podcast and they were like, Oregon State, Washington State seems like a fit for the Mountain West. I know that's obviously a step down, but they could see them going there. And then they could see Cal, like you said, joining the Big Ten, even Stanford. They said Stanford could go like independent just based off of, overall athletics. And this includes obviously non-revenue sports, obviously everything but football.
Yeah.
They're so good in, and so they could go independent. Cal is a little bit more tricky, and also academics, due to academics, they said. But Cal has the academics. Obviously, the sports for football are not as great. But yeah, obviously, there's still plenty of options left on the table, and with an ever expanding college football, you could definitely see more teams being added.
Yep. I do think for like Washington and Oregon, though, I get why they made the move to the Big Ten, but for them, they are at a disadvantage because they are not going to make. I think they're only going to make like 30 million, which is still a lot, but like not nearly as enough of like what is projected, like $75-ish million for the rest of the Big Ten schools. But not only that, but like they are so far, and so is USC and UCLA, what I'm about ready to say, but they are so far away from all the other schools that it's going to cost them an arm and a leg for travel. And, I think a lot of people are just thinking football, but you're thinking, all the Olympic sports and all those type of sports as well. It's going to cost a lot of money. So for them, I think they're at a major disadvantage. I get why they made the move though. It makes sense. But I think it's going to be a lot tougher for them than it looks, just looking at it holistically like that.
Yeah. From a business side, totally. They did say that obviously it helps. It's better than just having USC and UCLA because they're already running into scheduling issues. So now adding 2 more of those teams will help alleviate some of those problems. But you're exactly right. They're obviously not getting a full share. It's weird because like USC and UCLA are getting full shares right away, but obviously Oregon and Washington are not. And that's just, a business move by the Big Ten. I mean, they had no leverage in that situation. They were the ones wanting to join the Big Ten, at the last second. So it kind of makes sense from a business standpoint why they didn't get a full share.
Well, it's because the media. It's because the contract. I mean,
they already did the deal, right?
Yeah, and so there's no more money to be added. They already have the contract, and so it's really just like, well, yeah, you can join, but you're not going to get the full share of it. Because that was like, because all this was like with UCLA and USC, the reason why they're getting the full share is because all this stuff was negotiated after the fact that we got those 2 schools. And then, we negotiated the new contracts. And so they obviously get the full ones.
Right.
So,
right. And the way I understand the Pac-12 doesn't have a TV deal currently. There's one on the table. It's like an Apple TV deal. And which is based off of, it's like a subscription model based off of the more subscriptions they get, the more money they get. And they're still predicting less than like 30 million than what they would get by still joining the Big Ten, which is obviously why they made the move.
Yep, exactly.
Which is crazy to think about. Yeah. I mean, that's a terrible deal. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that has Apple TV. I know some people probably do, but like, I don't think it's as common as something like YouTube TV or something like that.
Yep, for sure. If I'm Oregon, Washington, I'm actually hoping that Stanford and Cal do come in, because then you have a decent amount of teams on the West Coast where every single year you're playing those teams. Eliminates at least a little bit of travel. Before we dive more into the conference realignment, one thing I will say with Iowa is I think we are actually, I mean, obviously the more teams you add, we're at a disadvantage, but the one advantage that we do have compared to some teams is we are in the middle of everything. So travel will be a lot easier for like Iowa compared to some of these West and East Coast teams. Because think about it, like a team think about like a team like Maryland, East Coast, they have to travel all the way out to the West Coast to play a game. You have the time zone differences. It takes a couple days to get used to that. And then when you go back home, time zone changes, and then vice versa. And I just think Iowa geographically is at a major advantage with all this. I think it's really going to help them compared to some of these schools where they're going to have to travel so much. They're going to have to go to different time zones. Plus the weather
multiple times a week for like basketball, for example. Like that's crazy to think about.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And because I'm really just thinking football, but every sport.
Yeah.
And then weather-wise too, I think we're at a major advantage because especially you get in October and November, you're going to have some of these schools that are not used to this type of weather So I really think there are schools that, and I'm not just talking the new ones like Maryland, Rutgers, Penn State, those teams on the East Coast. And then you have the teams out of the West Coast, major disadvantage in all this because of all the traveling, the time zone changes. I mean, I know when I go on trips and stuff, the time zone affects me so much. Like it takes a couple of days. And when you have a football game on a Saturday, you're leaving on Friday. It takes a while to get into that, zone.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it might spell trouble for some schools. So I like where I was at looking at it like that, right in the middle of the country.
That's an excellent point that I didn't think of. Like,
Yep.
obviously the travel I knew, but even like the weather. I mean, you get Iowa, who's used to playing in cold, warm, or rainy weather, whatever type of weather. So yeah, if you're gonna have me play USC, give me USC in November, right?
Yeah,
Give me that
exactly.
advantage. That's a great point. One thing I thought of too, and this is more for like Oregon and Washington. So it's weird to me that, like, imagine if the Pac-12 state somehow they could, obviously USC and UCLA already left, but say they could still, I think there was still like a way for them to all stay together. Obviously they're not now, but if they were, think about it from like a college football playoff perspective. You get an automatic bid if you win that thing. That conference is not that great at that point
No,
with USC and UCLA leaving.
that,
So it's ironic that they're still willing to, obviously no deal was met, and I'm sure that's why it took so long, because they probably
yeah,
still wanted to try to make it work, right? But they're obviously they're like, hey, I'm joining the Big Ten. They've got stability, they've got exposure. Think of all the NBC, CBS, and Fox. Every single window from noon to 10 o'clock at night is going to be epic games,
yeah,
and their exposure alone will help. I saw like recruiting, which I never thought of. Just because you might make the playoff because you're in the easiest conference, well, nobody's watching your game. So what recruit's going to want to go to Utah at, because they don't even know, like, they don't even see your games and stuff
yeah.
like that. Little things like you don't think about. So that's crazy to think about that, obviously, and then obviously the money. But yeah,
Yeah, I wonder if like you have like Washington and Oregon, like if because of that reasoning of like making the playoffs would be so much easier. I wonder if there was if there was a deal that was in place that was a decent amount of money. I wonder if they would say, okay, we'll stay with you guys, because yeah, not
right.
only are you getting the money, maybe not as much as you would in the Big Ten, but you're still getting the money. Plus, you're
Yeah.
probably going to go to the college football playoff more times than not. So that is an excellent point. But it, once again, it comes down to moolah. So,
Yep. It
um,
always does. And
yeah,
yeah, I think that's why some people, we were talking, like you just mentioned, we were talking last year, like we already kind of heard maybe Oregon, Washington, but it's been a year since those conversations were had. And I do think they were probably trying to work something out. But obviously the leadership of the Pac-12, the commissioners, they're not really getting shit done. And I think they're tired of like waiting and wondering and being left in the dust. So I
yep.
get it.
Yeah, and so we sit here and we say how do I feel about it, and I know a lot of people probably are like sick to their stomach about all this. Some people are probably excited. For me, I'm more in the middle. Like it is gonna suck kind of seeing the end of what we have known as a Big Ten, and change is always hard. Anything in life, change is difficult. The one thing that I'm looking forward to is just the fact that the matchups are going to be so much fun, and I'm talking like not just like all the teams in the Big Ten, but like specifically Iowa, where we're going to be driving to Iowa City some Saturdays, and we're going to be facing Oregon and Iowa City, or UCLA or USC, Washington. I just think that's cool. And like now that we're kind of going away from divisions now, we might have divisions now, but like right now as it stands, like we have the West Division, so we always play those teams. So like the chances of seeing Michigan and Iowa City or Ohio State was not very often, like once every 5 or 6 or 7 years. And so now without divisions, like the chances of seeing some of those teams come to Kinnick. So like I think as like a opponent perspective, like I think it's really awesome. Now I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Iowa to ever make it to the championship games, but I think the regular season is going to be a lot more fun. And I think those games in Iowa City are going to be epic, seeing some of these schools that who would have ever thought we would see in Iowa City come to play.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head really there. You know, personally, as an Iowa fan, right, this makes it 10 times harder. You're getting Oregon, Washington,
Yeah.
USC, and UCLA.
On
Like,
top of
which
the really
on
big
top of
schools in the Big
Ohio
Ten,
State and Michigan State and
Penn State and
Penn State, and yeah, to name just a few. I mean, like, it makes your chances a million times harder.
yeah,
But I think they're in this. Actually, I just thought of this. You make an excellent point. It's like, I think college football has a big game issue right now. We've kind of talked about that a little bit, right?
it does.
Sometimes it's not the NFL. NFL every week there's great matchups, and the regular season is never short of exciting. And sometimes in college football you just don't have a great week of matchups and stuff like that. I
No.
think this helps tremendously with that.
And
Right?
and to kind of piggy on that a little bit, you also have like, will we go to a 10 conference schedule?
Right.
Or maybe even 11 conference, yeah, because like you said, the big game problem definitely does exist right now in the Big Ten, and adding more teams in these conferences, I honestly wonder if we will go to a 10 or 11 game conference schedule. And at that point, then like you have like Iowa, for example, will probably end the Iowa State game, because if you're already playing 10 or 11 conference games, like why would we play another really, a decent school, right? Like it's another hard game. So why would we do that? So, but if you get to 10 or 11 conference games, like you're going to have a lot of good games almost every single weekend. So yeah, definitely great point there.
And real quick, like you said, I describe it as bittersweet. It's obviously you're not going to have probably some of those protected rivalries that we had before. We're not maybe going to play down the road a team like Iowa State, who we've always played.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, if you're looking at it from like you said, like a big picture perspective as a college football fan, not just an Iowa fan, I think it's better for the sport, and matchups are still going to be huge. So I think, a big game problem, which I feel like is a problem right now in college football, will not be as big of an issue. And that, solves one issue, I guess.
Yeah. Cause like I'm already imagining like Ohio State, USC, right? Some of those just big time
we just saw
games.
A few years ago, Oregon, Ohio State. Remember that? And like how epic that was. And Oregon actually beat Ohio State.
Yep. In Columbus. I do remember that.
So
like,
you just, and you never get to see that type of stuff. And now you do, which is crazy.
Yep. So speaking of these matchups, just a few short months ago, the Big Ten released the schedule for 2024, 2025. And we were going to do a podcast about that. Thank God we didn't, because essentially, some of it might matter because it sounds like they're going to keep the bulk of it, but they're obviously going to have to make changes. And I think there will be more changes than not, because you have to fit in essentially Oregon, Washington, and their opponents that they have to play, which is like 8-9 teams, right? So you take that times 2 teams. So there's going to be a lot of changing. So as for Iowa, for example, if nothing would have happened here, we would have had to face USC on the road, Ohio State on the road, UCLA at home. So I wonder if all that will stay and maybe 1 or 2 teams might be tweaked a little bit, or if we will see kind of a complete change. I'm hoping, because I don't want to play at Ohio State and at USC, so I'm hoping there's a change there. But I am hoping, though, that we get one of those 4 teams out west at home, whether it is UCLA or if it's one of the other schools. I would love to see like Oregon next year in Kinnick. God, that'd be freaking
oh yeah.
But
could you imagine? I mean, and this is just me like being like the fan I am, but it's like, could you imagine Oregon coming into Kinnick with some sick unis and like, we're just, I mean, it gets you all just so pumped for that
and
type of shit.
Going back to like 5 minutes ago, what I said is like, you never would have thought like we would be seeing Oregon in Kinnick. So, so I wonder how that will change.
Right.
I wonder if Iowa will stay with the 3 protected rivals. I don't see that being the case. I just don't think you can at that point. And I from the get-go, I thought that was kind of dumb, because you had Iowa with 3 who had the most, and then you had a team like Penn State who had 0. I think every team should have 1 and just leave it at 1.
How did they decide that? I'm still confused.
I don't know. I don't really know. Like, I guess it makes sense for like Penn State, because they really don't have like a legit rival in the Big Ten, while Iowa kind of does with 3 schools, all trophy games. So, but I guess for me, the question would be like, if they did have to maybe get rid of 1, which team would I like to not see play? And honestly, for me, like I've always kind of thought the Nebraska I just thought that was
Yeah.
kind of like a force
Yeah.
rivalry game. Like, I
I
don't know.
thought so too.
I'd rather keep
I did too.
Minnesota with the pig and then Wisconsin. Like,
Right. Right.
I don't know. With Nebraska, it just felt forced to me.
Yeah, it did in a roundabout way. Like it's almost like you're just like forcing me. Like I'm not a big Nebraska fan by any means, but like they joined obviously the Big Ten, later on, and it just always felt forced to me. And I don't know. I agree with that though.
Minnesota or Wisconsin. Let's say they moved down to just one. You had to pick between who would you keep?
I mean, I really don't like Minnesota and their fans, so probably Minnesota.
Keep
And I'm not
Minnesota?
just keep Minnesota.
Yeah, I would too.
And it makes more sense. We're border rivalry, right? Like I don't know, and I think that rivalry is much more lively than a Wisconsin one. And I'm
Yeah,
not just saying that because I don't want to play Wisconsin, which I don't. But
it would be nice not having
yeah,
to play Wisconsin every year.
yeah, that's what I would go with probably.
Yeah. So I know you have some questions that you have, and we can get into that, and then we can end it.
Yeah. I wrote down a couple of things that were either questions or comments that I saw kind of on social media or on different, like Big Ten Network, different shows like that. So I thought I'd jot them down and kind of go over them with you a little bit and see your thoughts and opinions about it. So the first one I got it was brought up by Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, head coach at Colorado. He was doing like a press conference, after joining the Big 12. And I think somebody asked him something about, this whole thing. And he kind of got off on a little tangent and was like, basically, why do we criticize players for jumping in the transfer portal and chasing a bag, getting all that NIL money when these schools are kind of doing the same thing, right? They're just shopping conferences to get on that money train as well. So I was kind of wondering your thoughts on it. Do you kind of agree with what he's saying or do you disagree?
No, I 100% agree. I think it is kind of funny. I mean, it's the same thing goes with like coaches too.
Or head coaching leaving for different jobs.
Yep. Correct. And people bash about that, but it's like, yeah, like what's the difference?
The only thing I would say with that is, and I think I talked about that with you, it's like maybe like Oregon and Washington didn't want to leave, but they almost had to because of everything else that happened.
Yeah, you almost feel like it is about money,
but you could say that about players. Well, I'm not getting any playing time, but I know I'd get playing time here and they're going to offer me more money. Yep. So I get that.
The only part of the whole NIR just transfer thing that I don't like, the only thing is like when a player is at a team, they transfer to another school, but then they transfer again. And like, here's an example.
Terry
Roberts like goes to Miami, plays in the spring, obviously must gotten beaten out or something. And then he transfers again and he gets to play 100%. Like right away. Like that should be like, okay, if you transfer like twice in one offseason, there should be like a penalty for that. Like, I don't know. I think that's kind of weird. Like,
there needs to be some sort of guardrails around that. I agree with that.
Yes. Or like, you get one time transfer. And if you transfer anymore, you have to sit out a year or something along those lines. But other than that, like I have everybody's trying to make money. Everyone's trying to get the bag in life. And if, you feel like you can make more at this school or you feel like you can excel more at this school and it's going to get you more money or whatever, like you should be able to do that.
Yeah. And this one we already kind of talked about. I guess I don't remember if you said exactly what your thoughts were on the remaining 4 teams of the Pac-12. Kind of what are your thoughts? Does the Pac-12 add more teams or is it going to fully disassemble?
So I believe that the Washington State and Oregon State will go to the Mountain West, but they will change the name to the Pac. Like it'll be like a Pac-12 team, or like vice versa. And they'll just be like another conference that's maybe we'll get an automatic bid. I don't know. I mean, when you expand the playoffs to 12 or maybe down the road like 16 teams, like. Every conference should get at least one automatic bid. So like maybe they will. I don't think Stanford and Cal will. I think they're too prestigious of schools to associate with some of those Mountain West teams. So I don't think they will. I don't know what they will do if they don't get an invite to the Big Ten down the road. I could see Stanford going on its own, being like Notre Dame. I don't know.
Yeah.
Very interesting to see. And then obviously kind of, to further that question too, it's like with the AC, I think the next conference to really that all this is going to get kind of shaken out is the ACC. I think down the road here, you're going to see teams jumping ship in the ACC. And I don't think the ACC is going to last, or if they do, they're going to be like the Pac or like the Mountain West, some of those conferences
Right.
they're still a conference, but they're just not. You got the big two of Big 12 or Big 10 and SEC. You got the next tier, which is just slightly below Big 12, and then it's just kind of everybody else.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to eventually come down to SEC, Big 10, and I think those two entities will keep growing and adding. So I kind of agree with you there. Next question. I guess the question is the Big 10, SEC, and Big 12, are they just power hungry? Are they just trying to swallow up every team and it's a race to see who gets the better teams? Or is it more the Pac-12's fault, like for not getting their shit together, and it's the Pac-12's reasoning?
So I think
all happening. Whose fault is it?
I think it's kind of 50-50 because I think the Pac-12, I mean, it's their fault for not, getting like acting quickly and figuring out a deal, blah, blah, blah. But it's also like these conferences, like the Big Ten, they know like if we don't do something, these other conferences are going to get those teams. So we better do something. Like think about like the Big Ten. Like they could have sat back and just been like, we'll just let this play out. But what if then Oregon and Washington decide, okay, we'll just go to the Big 12. Then like the Big Ten's like, damn it, it's like, it's like anything in life. Like that happens sometimes where it's like you wait too long and you're almost kind of like, gosh, why did I not act sooner on that? And I feel like that's kind of what these conferences kind of felt, or especially the Big Ten. It's like, we better do it now because you never know what will happen. They might go somewhere else and then it's too late. And then you're really kind of like beating yourself up for that. Like, why did we not act sooner? So I think that's kind of the reason.
Yeah. I think I would put most of the blame on the Pac-12 because I think if they had a TV deal, this wouldn't be an issue. But at the same time, I mean, these other conferences, it's all a business. So they've got to do what's best for their conference too. So I definitely agree with you there. And last question, I guess it's hard to, I'm talking about the big three, I guess, Big 10, Big 12, SEC. Who's right now as it sits, who's the most powerful conference? And what do you base that off of? Is it money? Is it winning? Is it, the type of the brands that are in your conference? I guess what are your thoughts on that?
I think it really comes down to, well, obviously the money, but like just the markets. And so that's why I personally believe the Big Ten is no bias. I think that's why I feel like the Big Ten is the most powerful, is because of how it stretches from the West Coast. You have the biggest market in the West Coast in LA. You have the biggest market in the East Coast in New York. You have another huge market right middle of the country in Chicago. So you have all the markets. And that's the reason why you are seeing how much money every Big Ten school is going to get. Now, yes, if you're talking strictly like, especially like football, if you're talking like just titles and those prestigious football schools, then yeah, obviously SEC is the biggest. But I think just overall, the Big Ten, and it's clear. I mean, we're going to be making the most out of any school. But
right.
I think, you have the two top guys, two top dogs in SEC in the Big Ten. And then, like I said, there's nothing wrong with being the third guy. They're just slightly below us in Big 12, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's going to be a fun league. They're just not going to make as much as Big 10 and SEC, but it's better than being like Washington State and Oregon State and Cal and Stanford and be like, where the hell are we going to end up? So.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You'd hate to be on the other end of that. And I guess the question was brought up because, obviously it's more recent, with USC, UCLA, and now Oregon, Washington.
Yeah.
But the SEC is adding Texas and Oklahoma, which when you're talking football, obviously historic winning programs and things like that. So it's just kind of a fun question, but you're exactly right.
Both prestigious schools, especially Texas. Yeah. Although I do think Oklahoma is going to struggle big time in the SEC. I just don't think they're going to I don't see them amounting to anything in the SEC.
Right.
And you kind of saw.
And you saw that when Lincoln left.
Yeah.
And how USC took off with Lincoln Riley. Like, I agree with you. I think they're going to struggle a bit. So, just some of the questions and things that, like I said, I saw and kind of wanted to bring up here that I thought were kind of interesting topics. And
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts.
And I could see the SEC at some point, which this would be big if they got like Clemson and like Florida State. That would be huge.
I saw that.
And that's why I think the Big Ten at down the road, like they're going to try their hardest because they know like if
the sweepstakes for sure.
Or Miami, teams like that. I could see like Virginia Tech. So
because at that point you've got like all 4 corners of the US if you're talking like Clemson, Florida State, like that is true.
I think whoever there, I mean, those teams aren't going to go to the Big 12. Like I just don't see Florida State, Clemson.
Right.
They're going to go to either.
Brands.
Yep. They're either going to go to SEC down the road or the Big Ten. And like I said, Big Ten gets some crazy. But
and that might be, like you said, that might be part of the reason why the Big Ten's doing what they're doing now. Right. You don't know what happens in the future. So you got to jump on every opportunity. Same with the SEC, same with the Big 12. So
I just don't see the Big Ten ending at 18. They're going to get to at least 20. And I think down the road, at least 24. If you get to 20, I really do think at that point you could do a 5 or 4 divisions, 5 teams in each division. I really think that you could get to that point, or you can have maybe 2 divisions, 10 teams on each. Or if you got to 24, you could do, 2 divisions, 12 teams. So I just don't think it ends at 18. Maybe for now, I think it's going to be quiet now for a little bit, possibly. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. But I think down the road. So I think that kind of wraps it up. We kind of covered everything in this short time.
I was just going to say one last thing real quick. It's like, this is obviously, it feels weird because it doesn't feel like the Big Ten anymore, but you got to remember, like, and to a way lesser degree, I mean, like you said, we added Rutgers and Maryland. And for me, it always, like, especially recently, it always felt like they're part of the Big Ten, but they're really not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that is true.
I think after 4 or 5 years of this, man, I think it's gonna feel familiar.
You're gonna forget. You're gonna forget what it used to feel like without them. Yeah.
So it's bittersweet now, used to it. But I think we'll get used to it. Right.
Yep. I think just one last thing too. It's especially for people that do not like this, cherish this season, cherish it. And then for Iowa, this might be your last real chance. You better do it. If you want to go to the Big Ten championship game, you better do it this year, especially if you have a good roster, and Iowa does. So this is the year to do it. You better do it.
That's a great way to end it. Yeah, I think, like you said, this is the time if for especially football.
Yep.
100%.
So, well, we're gonna end it on that. Good episode. We'll be back again in just a short 4 or 5 days. We're going to talk schedule with Iowa football. We are officially 4 weeks out. We are recording this on Saturday, so 4 weeks out from kickoff. Actually, 4 weeks from now, we will be in like the third quarter, hopefully up by a lot against Utah State. So that will do it for this episode. Thanks, Tyler. Have a good rest of your weekend. Thanks, guys, for listening, and go Hawks.